I used to not read when I was trying to write because I didn't want anything from the books I was reading to leach into my own work. But once I felt like I firmly established my own style, now I read for pleasure when I'm writing. And sometimes I read to inspire myself. I think if you want to be a writer, you have to read. You have to read voraciously. And not just so you can copy other writers. I think you have to learn what works for you and what doesn't. You know, you can enjoy a book as a writer and realize, well, I don't do that. I don't think I could do that. That's not my wheelhouse. I think everybody has things they do really well and things that they struggle with. And I think the secret to being a good writer is accentuating things you do well and minimizing things you don't. And reading teaches you that.
Welcome to The Stacks, a podcast about books and the people who read them. I'm your host, Tracy Thomas, and today I am joined by New York Times best-selling author S.A. Cosby. He has become a singular voice in the crime, mystery, and thriller genre with his unique take on Southern noir. His newest book, King of Ashes, is a Godfather-inspired crime epic where we follow the Carruthers family, particularly the eldest son, Roman, who will do anything to keep his siblings safe and well cared for, even offering up his services to a group of pretty bad dudes. Today, I talk with S.A. Cosby about how he approaches audience, violence, and about his love of Shakespeare. A quick reminder, everything we talk about on each episode of The Stacks can be found in the link in the show notes. Take a look at your podcast app. Are you subscribed to The Stacks? Go ahead and click that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if you're already subscribed, will you double check and make sure you've left us a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening? And if you love this podcast, if you want inside access to it, head over to patreon.com/thestacks and join the Stacks Pack and check out my newsletter at tracythomas.substack.com. This is a great way to support the work of the show and make sure that these podcast episodes are free to all. All right, now it is time for my conversation with S.A. Cosby. All right, everybody, I'm really excited today. I am joined by the thriller, mystery, crime writer of the moment, Mr. S.A. Cosby, whose brand new book, King of Ashes, is a wild ride. And you go by Sean. So I'm going to call him Sean, but he's S.A. Cosby. So I got to, do the whole thing. But Sean, welcome to The Stacks.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited to talk to you. So I'll just be real transparent. I don't read a ton of thriller. I read maybe a few a year. I did read Razorblade Tears of yours a few years ago when it came out. I was very excited to check out this book. You're quite good at what you do. And I want to talk about how you do it. But before we get to any of that, I want to start with, just for people listening, can you give us like the 30-second elevator pitch? What is King of Ashes about?
Yeah, so King of Ashes tells the story of the Carruthers family, oldest brother Roman, middle sister Nevaeh, baby brother Dante. As the book opens, Roman is living in Atlanta, Georgia. He returns home to Jefferson Run, Virginia, his hometown, where his family runs a crematory. Roman had gotten away from the family business and become a financial advisor, living among the high and mighty elites of Atlanta. He comes home because his father's been in a car accident. He's in a coma. Once he gets home, he finds out that the accident maybe wasn't an accident because his baby brother Dante is in debt to some very dangerous local criminals. And so Roman sets about trying to extricate his family from this terrible predicament, while also the siblings deal with a trauma that's been hanging over their heads since they were teenagers. When they were young children, their mother disappeared, vanished, never seen again for almost 20 years now. And everybody in their small town thinks their father killed her because she was having an affair. And everybody seemed to know about it. And so these twin stories converge in King of Ashes as we try to figure out how the Carruthers siblings are going to survive this situation they find themselves in.
Oh my gosh, you're so good at that. I'm so bad at doing that. It was going to take me like 7 days to try to explain that whole thing. And just so people know, we're keeping this spoiler free. Everything basically that you just heard happens in the first about 20 pages of the book. So we're keeping it clean. I don't want to spoil any twists and turns. If we do, we will edit it out. You will not hear it. Okay, I promise. I take spoilers very seriously because I am the kind of reader that likes to figure things out. I don't like knowing the ending. I want to start with the crematorium. that is sort of the central location of the book. It's this family business. It is very important to the family. There's obviously, it's sort of a juicy place to set a book about murder and mystery. What's your relationship to a crematorium? Do you have one in your family? Like, it feels like a place that every thriller should have, but like, I don't think people do. So I'm curious how you came to this.
I've had a lot of jobs besides being a writer over the years. One of the jobs I had was I worked at a funeral home. I was I guess you would call me a removal specialist. I went and picked up, I'm a pretty big dude. So it's like, I went and picked up bodies and stuff. So the funeral home I worked for did not have a crematorium. They would contract out to basically a private crematorium. A lot of funeral homes do that, especially in the South, in small towns. Anyway, but the crematorium itself always seemed like a place where I thought it would be interesting to sort of base a crime story because, it's a crematorium. And so, if you had criminals who needed to get rid of bodies, I thought there's not many better ways to get rid of bodies than burning them. And so, nobody really knows how much the average human remains weigh. So I always figured you could probably burn 2 or 3 people up at a time and nobody would notice it. Although doing research for this book, I found out that the average human remains weighs between 3 to 7 pounds. So,
wow. Did you do a lot of cremains research? Like how much, and I guess in general, how much research do you do? Are you a deep research, get distracted kind of person? Or are you a quick, what's the answer? Let me keep writing.
I'm a more just let me know enough that I sound like I know what I'm talking about. And so I'm not a real deep diver. I mean, I'm a naturally curious person, but when it comes to writing and research, I do want to get the details right. But I also don't want to overload the narrative with the minutia of whatever thing I'm researching, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's, fixing cars, whether it's a crematory. So I did enough research to make my characters conversant in the world that they are living in. And I hope I made it sound like they grew up in that environment.
You did. Because I thought maybe you did. I was like, oh, maybe this is like part of his life because it feels like he knows a lot of details about this thing.
There's just a lot of writing. That's just me trying to make it sound realistic. Yeah, I'm not a huge research guy. I'm actually pretty lazy when it comes to that. Okay. So I actually just want to get with my first book, Blacktop Wasteland. There's a car chase scene in there. There's a scene where a car doesn't jump an overpass; it drives off of an overpass, but it keeps driving. And I have a friend who's a physicist, and I asked him, I was like, could I do that? And I never forget. He said, "Well, it's possible." It's not probable. I said it's good enough. That's all I need.
Good enough.
So that's basically my view on research. I do enough so I can get going with the story.
Do you ever have readers push back? I mean, I know in some reading spaces like romance, readers are very in touch with the author. They're DMing, they're reaching out. There's a lot of communication, a lot of feedback happening. Is that something that even happens in sort of the thriller, crime, mystery space?
Yeah, definitely. Especially with firearms. People who read thriller mystery books are big into firearms, and they are very big in the specificity of firearms. I learned from my very first book with an independent publisher. I basically made the decision I'm not going to write about specific firearms anymore. I'm not going to use brand names or calibers. I'm just going to say they had a shotgun, they had a pistol, they had a gun. Because when you get into breaking it down like that, there's always the two biggest, I guess, fans that you hear from in the mystery space are firearm experts or firearm enthusiasts and historians, and so you write something set in a period piece. I had a friend who wrote a book set in the 50s after the World War II, after the Japanese internment. It was about Japanese Americans who got out of the camps and moved away from California to Chicago. And it's a great murder mystery book. But she had a scene in there where a character popped the top on a beer can. And she said that she got 30 letters from people who are into history, pop tops didn't come about until 1961. And she does so much research in just that one thing. People gravitate toward it. So I learned a long time ago, don't talk about Smith & Wesson or Heckler & Koch. Just say they had a gun, they had a revolver, they had a pistol, and let's keep it moving. So
Do you even know anything about guns?
Yeah, I know quite a bit.
You just don't know a ton. You're just not an enthusiast.
I know quite a bit about. I grew up in the South. I grew up hunting and fishing. I'm familiar with firearms, but I don't. I'm not into it in the way that some people are who maybe competitively shoot or obsessively collect them. I know enough. I like to say I have a country boy's understanding of firearms. Just the two biggest rules I was always taught. Always assume every gun is loaded and don't point at anything you don't intend to shoot. So
Right, right. Okay, well, since we're sort of on this topic of violence, this is really what I want to talk to you about because you write some graphic, violent stuff. Like, and this is coming from me. I love nonfiction. I'm a real nonfiction girly. The darker, the better. I want to read about the worst of humanity. So I am into the graphic violence in your books. Like I was like sitting on the edge of my seat. There's an early scene where the Carruthers brothers sort of first encounter the people to whom Dante, the younger brother, owes money. And that scene, I had to close the book afterwards and be like, whoa. And I started just writing down notes and things I wanted to ask you about. My first question is, what is your relationship like to writing violence? Do you enjoy writing these scenes? Are they fun for you? Is there some sort of like pleasure in writing some of the brutal stuff?
I don't think it's a pleasure. I think for me, it is a necessary component. I don't write violence. I hope people don't take it that I write violence gratuitously. I don't write. Yeah, I don't write violence for violence sake. For me, in most of my books, and most of the books that I like, the books that I really enjoy, in the crime genre, because I read everything. I don't just read crime. But books that I really enjoy, violence is expository. And what I mean is violence moves the story. Violence tests the mettle of the characters. Violence is the language with which some people speak. And so for me, like I said, it's never gratuitous. I'm never like, rubbing my hands together and saying, ooh, I can't wait to knock somebody's teeth out. Unless they're a bad guy. Bad guys, I like doing that too. But but for the most part, the violence is there to set the parameters of the world that we're in, right? So if you read a book where, like I said, somebody gets their teeth knocked out in the first 8 chapters, then you understand pretty quickly this is the world that we're in. But also violence can reveal character, just like dialogue does. So you have a character who revels in violence, that likes it, then you realize, okay, that person's a sadist. That person has maybe issues that they need to maybe take account of. On the other hand, when you see a character who meets out violence in a very utilitarian, grim way, you understand that this person is somebody who feels violence is a tool they have to use in their job or in their experience. And so, violence is as American as apple pie. Our country is based, on blood and fire. It's based on the enslavement of one people and the genocide of another. And so, violence drives the American ethos. Manifest Destiny was a political and sociological expression of violence. And so for me, violence is a part of human experience. But I never want to write it. I never want people to come away from it thinking it's just there for kicks. It's not. Don't get me wrong. I do like creating scenes that are memorable, that are gnarly. But I don't enjoy it in so much as the way that I like it or feel like it's something that makes me happy. It's a necessary component. I will say this though, I do like writing badass lines, like badass threat. I do enjoy that. A good threat is a art. There's an art to writing a good threat, And so in Razorblade Tears, my favorite threat is Ike after he's confronted by the bikers at his Ike is one of the characters in Razorblade Tears. He's a landscaper, he runs a gardening service, and he gets confronted at his shop, and he tells the guy, "I ever see you around here again, there won't be enough left of you to put in a Ziploc bag." I love that. That's such a good threat because you realize by that point, Ike means it, and he can back it up. And so I like writing a good threat or a good put down, but the violence is just a necessary component so that we establish the rules of the world that we're in.
And when you're writing those scenes, the violent scenes, and you're thinking about like what one person does to another, how deep are you thinking about like what body part or what in which way they do this. Because if you're using it as like a way to show who a character is, or to, kind of set the scene or let us know information about the world, how detailed are you thinking about the violence? Or are you just like, he kicks him in the nuts and like, that's what people do?
Yeah, no, when I write violent scenes, I'm very detail oriented. I want to use like your five senses to put you there. So you smell, the blood, the coppery scent of blood. You can taste it in the air. You hear the crunch of bone. You see, the skin flayed or bruised or battered. Everything is a part of that. I want you to feel immersed in it. I want you to feel the pain that the individual is feeling. But I also want the reader to sort of understand the position or the mentality of the person meting out the violence. I'm a former high school theater kid, so I think about the blocking in the scene that I'm writing. What's the position of the bodies or the people, the individuals involved in the fight or the beatdown? Because sometimes I write things that are not fights; they're just people getting beat. And who can see it, and who can feel it, and what is the villain or the person handing out the beating? What are they thinking? How do they feel? Like there's a scene and you mentioned it. We're going to tread lightly. There's a scene early on in King of Ashes. Those gangsters feel very disrespected in that scene.
Yeah. Yeah.
They feel very, very disrespected. And so their anger, if not justified, for them, it feels justified. And so again, I want you to understand that. Or the other side, when I'm writing a scene like in Razorblade, where and again, Razorblade is about two fathers, one black, one white, both ex-cons who are getting revenge for their murdered gay sons. When those characters are meeting out violence, I want you to understand that violence for them is a confession of their grief.
Right.
Their sons are dead. Right. And so everybody's going to feel their pain. And so like going back to King of Ashes though, again, when I write violence, I want it to be as detail oriented as possible. I want it to be a sensory overload. I want you to feel the sweat, the spit, the crunch of bone, the slap of the fist, the way lips flatten against your fists when you punch someone. I want you to feel all that. And so I definitely want to go as deep as I can into that to immerse you in that moment.
I mean, I think you do it. I do. I think you're really pulling it off. Whatever you're doing, it is working. There are quite a few memorable violent scenes in this one. You mentioned being a former high school theater kid. I myself am also a theater kid. I was a college theater major and everything. And I did notice a Shakespeare reference in this book. I am a big time Shakespeare fan, so I love to see it. But what's your relationship to Shakespeare?
Oh, I'm a huge Shakespeare fan. I love Shakespeare.
Oh my gosh. What's your fave?
My two favorites are, I'll give you my top three.
Okay, go ahead.
Macbeth, King Lear, and Titus Andronicus.
Okay, you and I are aligned on Macbeth and Titus. I personally do not care for King Lear. King Lear is not my favorite. You have a Macbeth reference in King of Ashes, which I love. I think Titus is one of the underrated greats. I think it doesn't get done a lot because it's really hard to do the violence in that on the stage. Yeah. Like you're asking for a lot from your local community theater. Yeah. But the writing in that one is just stupendous.
Oh yeah. It's the Titus Andronicus is the undistilled, rage of the wronged, Yeah. And it's the wages of sin. It's the cost of violence manifested. I love that play. But Macbeth I like Lear just because I like the conceit of Lear, of the family dynamic of it, of the drama, of how we want to put these titles on people. You're the one that loves me the most. You're the one that's most dedicated. You're this, you're that. And that's, the sort of toxicity and dysfunctional family that exists in that. But of course, I think if you had to ask me, like, if I had to say a favorite, I think it's Macbeth. Just because Macbeth, in its Globe Theater incarnation, Shakespeare was writing for the masses, but he proved that you can write for the masses and also write high art. And I don't think there's, Macbeth is, not to get into a discussion about Macbeth, but in the play, Macbeth is a badass. Macbeth is the best soldier. He's the best swordsman. He's a warrior, but he's also incredibly insecure. He's also incredibly fragile mentally. I think that there's an undercurrent of sexual obsession between him and Lady Macbeth that isn't as employed in some of the performances as maybe it was in the earlier ones. And so for me, that play is all about man's hubris. And I think King of Ashes, for me, is about hubris. It's about, the idea of, this idea that I know what's best, that my actions always are justified by the results that I'm trying to attain. And so I think Roman is, I wouldn't say, I'm not trying to compare my writing to Shakespeare, but I think Roman is in that long line of not heroes, but protagonists that, reach too far sometimes.
Yeah. It's so funny hearing you say those three, because I think if I had to pick three Shakespeare books to compare to King of Ashes, those are probably the three I would pick. You're definitely working in all three of those frameworks. Like obviously the three children, the returning child, the father who's like off in a place that is not accessible to the children, and I think
that's
also in the genres.
Too. That's all intentional too. That's all.
I love it.
Yeah.
Do you think of Shakespeare, like, is that something that informs your work? Are you thinking about of his works as you're writing? Are you like the epicness kind of your stories? I think from the two that I've read that like you're not writing small stories. You're writing very big stories about, unknown people, but that also feels extremely Shakespearean to me.
Yeah. I mean, Shakespeare is a huge influence on me, but I mean, also I'm a big film fan. So cinema is a huge influence on me. I've mentioned in passing interviews, The Godfather is some influence on this, but also, other movies about family dynamics. I mean, there's The Magnificent Ambersons by Orson Welles. There's, Citizen Kane. There's, I love Orson Welles, by the way. Shakespeare is a big influence. Other novelists that I read, Dennis Lehane, who's a crime novelist, Jane Smiley. I know it doesn't seem like it, but 1,000 Acres was a big influence on this book.
That's her Lear book.
Yeah, because I love 1,000 Acres. And I still
never read it.
And I love
I'm going to read it this year.
I love what she did with it. The sort of the way she took the Lear story and turned it on its head. So there are other. I like the idea of stories feeling mythic, of stories feeling like, I like the idea of somebody. It's like I want my books to feel like somebody grabbed you by the hand and say, "Here, come sit down beside me, next to me in front of this fire. Let me tell you this crazy stuff that happened."
Yes.
And I wanted to feel like this. It's both personal but also legendary. In a way. So I definitely am trying and the books that I like, the books that I love do that, both crime fiction and literary fiction books that I like, also, but in that epicness, I also like sort of the small moments. I'm a huge fan of Raymond Carver, the short story writer.
Okay.
And, like that story, the famous story of what do we talk about when we talk about love? It's two couples. This is their pre-gaming before they go out for the night. So they're drinking scotch and they're sitting around a table in a small suburban town, and they start talking about love. They start having a sort of philosophical conversation, and you realize fairly early on, one of these couples still love each other, and the other couple doesn't. And the couple that doesn't love each other do not realize they don't love each other. It's the other couple observing their conversation, realizing it, and it's so uncomfortable and so brutal in a way. And so that's a part of my influence as well, the emotional violence that exists between people.
Yeah, that sounds, as you're describing it, I've never read it. It sounds a little bit like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
A little bit, but it's not as histrionic as that.
Got it. But that's that same kind of thing of like these two couples together, and like one couple realizes something's going on, and the other couple is like in their whole other world, and it is emotional violence certainly between George and Martha.
Oh yeah, but also another book that really influences me or has influenced me that I read a lot. I've read it over and over again. The Secret History by Donna Tartt. And that book gives you that sort of mythic, epic, sort of old 19th century novel feel. It has that sort of Willa Cather. It sort of has that sort of Thomas Theodore Dreiser, sort of early American feel, but of course distilled through, the 80s at Bennington College, where she went. So again, all the books I read influence the work that I'm trying to do.
And do you read? How much of your life is reading? How much of your practice as a writer is reading? And when do you read in relationship to when you write? Will you read as you write? Will you stop reading when you're writing? Like, what does that look like for you?
I used to do that. I used to not read when I was trying to write because I didn't want anything from the books I was reading to leach into my own work. I wanted to sort of I didn't have a style. So I didn't want,
Mm-hmm.
if you read my very, very first novel, a crime novel called My Darkest Prayer, it's very apparent that I'm sort of, it's sort of Walter Mosley light. And so I'm trying to,
Okay.
but once I felt like I firmly established my own style, now I read for pleasure when I'm writing. And sometimes I read to inspire myself. Like I got stuck when I was writing All the Sinners Bleed. And so I took a break and I read like some really good novels that were in that same sort of field, the same sort of genre. And it helped unloosen or unlock, I guess, sort of the block that I had. So I do read for pleasure now. When I'm not writing, when I'm in between books, I try to read as much as I can. I have two, I have like, I'm embarrassed to say that I have like two Kindles because
Okay.
I invariably lose them around the house. So
Okay.
if I find one, I just pick up in that one what I was reading in the other one. But I love being able to read for pleasure. I just finished like a couple books a few weeks ago, and so reading is very important to me. I think, and I don't think I'm alone in this. I think if you want to be a writer, you have to read. You have to read
Yeah.
voraciously, and not just so you can copy other writers. I think you have to
Mm-hmm.
learn what works for you and what doesn't.
Yeah.
You can enjoy a book as a writer and realize, well, I don't do that. I don't think I could do that. That's not my wheelhouse, and
Right.
I think that's
Right.
important. I think it's important to know, what your limitations are. A lot of people will say, well, there's no limitations in art. I think everybody has things they do really well and things that they struggle with. And I think the secret to being a good writer is accentuating things you do well and minimizing things you don't. And
Yeah.
reading teaches you that.
Yeah. It's so interesting to hear you say this because I've been doing the show for a while now. It's over 7 years, and I've talked to a lot of amazing and not so amazing writers. But one of the through lines that I have noticed is that the people who write, not even the best, who are the most clear as writers, who have the most specific voice, who are doing a thing that feels unique to them, all of those people are extremely voracious readers. I'm thinking of you. Like, I think your books feel extremely S.A. Cosby, TM, Jesmyn Ward, Kiese Layman. Like, all of you are voracious readers who read broadly and read widely and read consistently. And so it's interesting to hear you say that, because there are many writers I know who I've talked to who are like, I read, but this like compulsion to read, to devour the work in which the medium in which you work is something that I think the most talented and most, again, specific writers are doing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think the writers that I enjoy the most, that I respect the most, that I'm most in awe of, when you get a chance, and I've been very lucky to get a chance to talk to them, they are voracious, obsessive readers.
Yeah.
Like I got the opportunity to meet Jesmyn Ward a few years ago. And to me, Jesmyn Ward, after the passing of Cormac McCarthy, is the finest living American writer.
Yeah.
And talking to her at the National Book Awards, it was so funny because I was in the green room there. I don't take myself very seriously. So sometimes when I get invited to stuff, I don't realize how big a deal some stuff is. Like,
Yeah.
I got to the National Book Award, I was like, oh, they wanted to interview me. And I was like, oh, I guess they'll have me in a room with like 20 people. And I'll talk. No, it was an auditorium. It was a bunch of people. I was interviewed by a former U.S. attorney. I was like, oh my God, what's happening?
Oh my
So
gosh.
afterwards, I was in the green room, like eating my turkey sandwich. And one of the people volunteering was like, hey, you need anything? I said, no, I'm good. And then they just asked like, hey, are there any writers here you'd like to meet? So I don't want to bother anybody, and I'm just going to eat my turkey sandwich and drink my soda and head back to my hotel. And then I said, well, I heard Jesmyn Ward was here, but don't bother her. I don't want to bother her. And then like 5 minutes later, she came over. We were both wearing Chuck Taylors. And she came over, and I saw this person wearing Chuck Taylors. And she's like, hey, they said you wanted to talk to me. And I was so just taken aback and aghast. And I usually don't have trouble talking, but I couldn't hardly speak because I'm in awe of her talent. I think she's probably deleted more good sentences than I'll ever write. But she was so nice and so giving. And we talked about reading, and we talked about Zora Neale Hurston, but we also talked about, reading, other types of books and other type of fiction. And I took from her that she's a voracious reader. Like I said, I think she's just the very best we have to offer in American letters right now.
You're not going to get a complaint from me. I feel the same way. I also got to meet her, and it was a dream. And she did this podcast, and she talked about her love of romance and just how much she likes to read. And I was like, of course, this makes so much sense. Of course you would be. Of course you would be a student of the thing that you are becoming a master of. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Valentine's Day is upon us, and I've got love on the brain. Love for books. Duh, of course. Hello. Did you forget what podcast you're listening to? I love bringing you all great reads, exclusive author interviews, and behind the scenes book gossip. But I can only do that with your support over on Patreon and Substack. Our Stacks Patreon community, also known as the Stacks Pack, is where you can go for book club meetups, a private, very active Discord, and a year-long mega reading challenge to help you achieve all your reading goals. Plus, you also get that monthly bonus episode. Now, over on the Substack, you can subscribe to my newsletter, Unstacked, where I keep the book conversations going. I also give you a healthy dose of sports and pop culture, definitely some hot takes happening over there. And again, that bonus episode. If you don't have a few dollars to spare, don't worry. There are free options on the Substack and the Patreon to get you a little extra Stacks magic. Making this podcast is a total team effort, and by supporting my Patreon and my Substack, you allow me to support my amazing team that makes the show possible every single week. So if you or your friends are looking to meet other book lovers and support this indie podcast, come hang out with me on Patreon, Substack, or both. I would love to have you. And since we're talking about love, you can gift subscriptions to the Patreon and the Substack for that special reader in your life. For the Stacks Pack, head to patreon.com/thestacks. And for the newsletter, head to tracythomas.substack.com. And also, there are links to both in the show notes. Okay, see you in the Stacks. All right, we are back. And I want to talk to you about, so like I said, I'm not like a mystery crime person. I read my first Walter Mosley book last month for our book club. We did Devil in a Blue Dress. I learned a lot about sort of a lot of things, but I have some questions about genre and how you think about it and how you sort of define yourself if you do. So my first question is, what kind of writer do you say you are? I said crime, thriller, mystery, but I don't know if that's right.
No, I think that's right. I think, I guess if you had to really nail it down, I would say I'm a Southern noir crime fiction author, because the South is very important to my work. Being a Southerner is important to my sort of milieu, if you want to call it that. But I hold up the banner of noir fiction, of crime fiction. I feel like, in a very broad sense, all fiction can be classified as crime fiction. If you read Dostoevsky, in Crime and Punishment, like I said, I mentioned Theodore Dreiser earlier in American Tragedy, Franz Kafka, the Penal Colony. If you read Pushkin, if you read Shakespeare, there's murder, mayhem, violence, jealousy, anger, avarice, greed in all fiction. So I think crime fiction encompasses a lot of different subgenres. I like to call crime fiction the gospel of the dispossessed. So I hold up the bloodstained banner of the noir crime fiction writer.
And what makes something noir?
That's a great question, because there's a difference between, like, crime fiction, obviously, like literary fiction, has different subgenres. There's the murder, what I like to call the bloodless murder mystery, which you're talking about, like drawing cozy mysteries, or Sherlock Holmes, or or Hercule Poirot, or Ellery Queen, or anything like that. Barbara McNeely, Blanche White series. Pretty bloodless murders that are much more about the intricacy of solving the mystery. Dennis Lehane, who I'm a huge fan of, said, and I'm paraphrasing because I know I'm not going to get the quote right. He said, a lot of literary fiction is like Icarus, people flying to great heights and having great fall. He said, noir is people on the street falling in the gutter, and it's sort of this, it's people who are at the very end of their rope, people at their most desperate, doing really bad things for what they think are good reasons. I think that's a pretty succinct description of noir. I mean, you can get into the more esoteric part of it, that noir fiction is sort of the post-war existential malaise that infected America, that has traveled and traversed social and economic changes as we come into, the new millennium. But I think, that's a little foo-foo for my taste. I think, I think it's just, bad people, good people doing bad things for what they think are good reasons.
Okay, that's fair. Then let me ask you this now. So how much are you operating within the constraints of genre versus thinking about sort of subverting it or pressing it forward? Is that something you think of, or do you like the constraints?
I don't think there are any constraints of genre. I think once you write, say for instance, I'm writing a crime novel, right? But I think within that crime work framework, you can have a family drama. You can have, sort of a character study. You can have, the classic man versus man versus the environment, man versus himself. You can have all that within a story about, gangsters trying to rob a bank. And so I don't believe in the constraints of genre. For me, a lot of genre is just where bookstores want to put books.
Yes.
So, I have a really good friend who's also an amazing novelist named Jordan Harper. And he lives in LA. He's from the Ozarks. We've been friends for about 7 or 8 years now. He's just an incredible writer. And he said to me one day, he said, I feel like what you and I are doing is that we're not so much pushing the envelope as we're cutting it into strips. We're cutting it and allowing certain things to come in and certain things to move out. And I think that's sort of an apt description of what he does specifically and what I'm trying to do. When I talk about writing, like for instance, I grew up, there was a series of novels when I was a kid. I read them when I was a kid. The Parker novels by Donald Westlake. He was writing under a pseudonym. And these are very sort of very violent, very late 1960s, early 70s crime novels. And they're fun. They're fun novels about this dude named Parker, who's a vicious criminal, who's also a master heist planner and stuff like that. And they're very machismo driven and so on and so forth. But they're also beautifully written as well. The prose is very striking, these books. However, Parker is just that. He's just a heist guy. He's just a tough guy, And I when I wrote my first book, Blacktop Wasteland, I had the idea of I'd like to do a Parker novel, but where we see Parker go home, where we see his family, where we see his friends. And so when it came to writing, say for instance, Raised by Tears, we all know the revenge novel. Raised by Tears was, I'm telling on myself now. Raised by Tears was largely inspired by an old 1970s grindhouse B movie called Rolling Thunder, starring William Devane, and it's Tommy Lee Jones's first starring role. And it's about a dude who's a Vietnam vet who he gets brutal. It's not funny. It's showing no laugh. He gets brutalized, and his family gets murdered. He gets his hand cut off, and he seeks revenge against the people that did it. And his single-minded purposeness to get this revenge, even though at one point he realizes, it's not going to bring my family back, but it's all I have. Right. And so Raised by Tears was inspired by that. But I also, again, wanted to expand that to have a conversation about homophobia and masculinity and grief. And so, I'm giving you a long rambling answer. I'm sorry. I don't believe in the constraints of genre. I believe genre is a comfortable sort of tag or hierarchy that we put on ourselves. But I believe the only constraints of genre is your imagination.
That's fair. I want to come back to Razorblade Tears and the homophobia and that in a moment, but I want to stick with this line of questioning because, I'm a lawyer, line of questioning. I want to ask you about audience. So obviously I am a, sort of online book person. I function in the world a lot of Bookstagram and book influencing, which is an extremely female sort of dominated space. There are, of course, men and non-binary people and people who are in the space who are not women, but there's a lot of women. And your books are extremely popular in this online book space. And I'm wondering how you think about audience. Are you thinking about women as a large part of your audience? Are we a large part of your audience? Or is that just the bubble that I'm in? What do you know about your audience and how much does that play into your writing?
Yeah, so that's interesting that you say that because ever since I started, I've had a really strong support among female readers and writers. And some of my favorite writers are female writers, obviously. I've spoken in previous interviews about my admiration for Jennifer Hillier and Kelly Garrett. I've spoken to you about 1,000 Acres by Jane Smiley, which I think is just one of the great American novels of Donna Tartt, so on and so forth. When I was writing, I don't think I had a specific audience in mind when I started. I just wanted to tell interesting stories about the place I'm from, When I first started writing, it's funny, side note, I didn't know if I could write mysteries because where I come from, I'm from a very small town. Most murders are not a mystery. Like we all know who done it. It's just, can somebody prove it? And so, but anyway, back to your question. I'm sorry. And so I didn't really have a specific audience in mind. I wasn't writing for anybody other than myself, really. I wanted to write a book that I would enjoy reading, but I had a very wonderful sort of happy, I don't say coincidence, but I've always had this really strong support among female writers. Readers and writers. And I take that seriously. I try to write. I don't think, if I'm being perfectly honest, I don't think my female characters in my first couple books were really well written. I tried to be honest. I didn't want them to be, arm candy for the protagonist. Like with Blacktop Wasteland, the main character's name is Bulwark, but everybody calls him Bug. That's his nickname. He's a very dangerous man, very intimidating man. The only person in that book that's not afraid of him is his wife. Right. And she's the one that speaks truth to power to him about things.
Very Shakespearean.
Yeah, exactly. Very Lady Macbeth. And it's what raises my tears. The two main characters, one is single, one is married. The married character, again, his wife is the strongest person in that book who doesn't coddle him. She's very honest with him about his relationship with their son. And so I've always tried to get better at writing female characters, just because I believe that's what a good writer should do. All your characters should have agency. In my book, All the Sinners Bleed, the lead character is a black man named Titus, Shakespeare, who has a girlfriend named Darlene. And early on in that book, you realize that their relationship isn't that strong. He doesn't care about her as much as she cares about him. And there's a scene later on in that book, I'm not giving a spoiler away, where she speaks to that. I wanted to get better at writing female characters. So when I got to writing King of Ashes, I really worked really hard to make Nevaeh a co-lead in this book, that she's equal to her brothers. And I also wanted to have a discussion about, I don't want to call it the plight, but just the situation that in the African-American community that I've observed my own life, how Black women often have to be the backbone of the family, of the society, of the culture, and how they get little to no thanks for that. And I wanted to represent that with Nevaeh. And I'll tell you, it's funny, you talk about online sphere. The last two books of mine, I've just had such an explosion of female fans, of female readers, and I couldn't be happier. I'm very honored by that. I did an event in Atlanta a couple months ago at the Fulton County Library on a Sunday afternoon. And it was like 150 people there, and about 130 were women, wow. And I take that very seriously. I have a great deal of respect, and I also have a great deal of admiration and gratitude. And I'm going to tell you something else funny about online stuff. We were talking, man, I'm going to tell you what, so a couple days ago, some online person tried to make a joke out of my writing name, S.A. They were trying to make a joke. They were trying to tie me to Bill Cosby, and they were trying to make a joke around that. And let me tell you, Black women came and they read that dude for filth. Oh my God, nobody had my back the way Black women have. So I'm definitely honored by that. But in all honesty, I don't write for any specific audience. I think if you do that, you're limiting yourself. I write to tell a good story, and I write to tell a story that will entertain me. I am just very honored and pleased that women, female readers have really embraced my work. And I am truly, truly grateful for that.
Yeah. How do you deal with online spaces with criticism? I mean, that was sort of my question around homophobia, because I did see online there were people who felt uncomfortable with some of the representations in razor blade tears, and I'm sure you see that stuff. Yeah. If I'm seeing it, I have to imagine that you're seeing it if you're on social media. So how do you respond? How does that impact you? Maybe not like in your writing, but just as a creative person.
I'm a human being. Obviously, nobody ever likes to see their 1-star reviews. Nobody ever likes to hear somebody say you suck, but also for me, I don't want anybody to be, I don't want to write anything that hurts somebody. You know what I'm saying? That feels like I disrespected them when I'm writing about a character outside my own personal providence, Right. So for instance, we'll talk about this. For Razor Blade Tears, I sent it out to a lot of authenticity readers, sensitive readers, what you might want to call it. I have LGBTQ friends that I had read it. And once I got their notes and the notes from authenticity readers, and I took the notes that worked, the book that I presented, the book that got published, is a book that comes from a place of respect and love. But everybody doesn't have to like it. And I saw some comments from people in the LGBTQ community who really loved the book, and I saw comments from people who really didn't care for it. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. I don't have any animosity toward that. You know, as an African American man, I have grown up most of my life reading books that didn't have Black people in it, or had really, really ham-fisted sort of representation of African American folks. So I understand seeing your culture maybe taking it in a way that you didn't feel was respectful. And I've also seen writers do really good jobs with it, you know? And so I don't take the criticism personally. I think everybody has a right to their opinions, you know. But also now to that point, I'll just mention this. I have a really good friend who's an LGBTQ writer, and I let him read an early advanced copy of All the Sinners Bleed. No, I'm sorry, of Raised by Tears. And there's a scene in Raised by Tears. Since you read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's a scene at a gay bar in Raised by Tears, right? And the original scene, the way I wrote it, my friend, the writer PJ Vernon, he read a copy of the early draft. He calls me and says, "Sean, that scene in the bar, I get what you're trying to do." He said, "but you're making them caricatures and not characters." And so what happens in the original scene, it pretty much plays out the way it does in the final copy. Ike gets into a confrontation with a gay man who's hitting on him. But in the original scene, the bouncer or the bartender comes from around the bar. He separates Ike and the other man. And then all the other patrons of the bar are sort of off to one side, you know, sort of, and I'm exaggerating, but sort of with their arms crossed and just shaking their heads reproachfully. And PJ said, "Look, man, a fight in a gay bar is a fight like any other bar. There's people getting in it. There's people getting out of the way. There's people taking pictures, world star, all of that. You know, you know, in your effort to be respectful, you lost the humanity." And I thought that was really revelatory for me as a writer and as a person. And so for me, I don't take online criticism. I don't dismiss it, but also don't take it that seriously. I know what I'm trying to do. I know when I write a book, I'm writing it to the best of my ability. I come from a very blue collar background. And so when I write, I'm giving you everything I got. You know, I'm literally, like Hemingway said, I'm opening the vein and bleeding on the page. You don't have to like it, and you don't even have to respect it, but I know that it came from a really good place. So I don't engage with, first of all, as a writer, I don't think it serves any purpose to engage with criticism. You know, people have a right to their own opinions. You know, but at the same time, there's sometimes I read an opinion where it's like, come on, man. You know, like,
yes, of course.
I had a guy criticize me. He had read Black Cop Wasteland, which in many ways is a very masculine sort of machismo book. And in many ways not. But anyway, he read Raised by Tears, and this is what he said. I'll never get it. He gave it a 1-star review. He said, "I didn't read this. I didn't want to read about all this gay sex in this book. This really took me out of it." There is no gay sex in Raised by Tears.
Right.
At all. And so it's like, you know, hey man, I don't know what book you read, but you know, roll my eyes. But you know, I think if you're making homophobes angry, you're doing God's work.
I think that's right. I want to ask you a little bit about your writing process. How do you like to write? How many hours a day? How often? Music or no? In the home, out of the home? Snacks and beverages? Rituals? Tell me about it.
Okay, so I started writing when I still had a day job. So I used to write on my lunch break. I used to go to a coffee shop and write. So what
was the day job?
I was a retail manager for a hardware store, for a national chain. And it rhymes with goes and slows. But anyway, and so I used to go to a coffee shop up the street from the store. And so I like noise. I like music. I like I can write in any environment. I literally finished a book on a plane last year. So I don't mind writing in different environments. My preferred environment now is at home in my recliner. I have a little lap desk that I write on. I don't have a big like Gothic desk. I listen to music. I love listening to music. Sometimes I listen to music that I hope invokes the energy I'm trying to put in the scene. So if I'm writing a fight scene, I'll listen to heavy metal, hard rock, or heavy, hardcore hip hop. But if I'm writing a more sensitive scene, I'll listen to romance songs, R&B songs. Sometimes if I'm just writing a scene where somebody's maybe having a moment of meditation or contemplation, I'll listen to instrumental music. I'll listen to classical. I listen to everything. I'm a very genre-less person when it comes to things.
Sounds like it.
And so
I love this.
Yeah. So I'll listen, like if I'm writing a fight scene, I'll listen to the Allman Brothers Whipping Post, or I'll listen to MOP Annie Up. But also if I'm writing a romantic scene, I'll listen to Jeff Buckley. I'll listen to Smokey Robinson. I'll listen to I'm a kid in the 90s, so I listen to Blackstreet,
Yes.
or if I'm writing a scene where it's just a character really going through a thought process. I love Mozart. I love Chopin. I love, Bach. I also love jazz. I love Miles Davis. So music is a big part of my writing life. I am so sad that when, I want to sometimes put music in my books, but you got to pay those copyrights. So it's like difficult. But my other thing is I have two superstitions about writing. I have a hat that I wore when I wrote Black Hot Wasteland before I had an agent, before I had a contract. So I feel like that's my lucky hat. So I wear it when I write. And that poor hat is so damaged. I had to restaple the bill on recently. So with industrial staples. I have that hat. And every time I finish a book, I take a shot of a very expensive whiskey that was gifted to me by a writer that I don't want to name. There was a very famous writer who took an interest in my work early on, and he gave me a really expensive bottle of whiskey. So whenever I finish a book now, I give myself a shot of that. I guess
is it like Pappy?
it is a bottle of Pappy. So it's a very expensive bottle, and I only drink it. Yeah, I only drink out of it when I finish a book. I guess the other little superstition I had years ago, I read an interview with a writer named Evan Hunter, who wrote under the name Ed McBain. He wrote a long series of mystery novels called the 87 Precinct novels. And he used to say he couldn't write a book until he came up with a really interesting title. And so I sort of took that. I come up with an idea, and then I come up with what I hope is a really good title. I can't write the book until I get that title set. Which is weird, I know.
I love that. Okay, I have another question then about sort of there's all these twists and turns, right? So how much do you know? How much of that do you have to know as you sit down to write? Like, okay, this is something that's going to happen. Because don't you have to write towards those things? Or are you one of those kind of writers who just sort of comes up with characters and lets them do things on the page?
Nah, I can't do that. I'm too OCD for that. But I don't write like a complicated outline. I write what I like to call a pretty annotated synopsis.
Okay.
A lot of times it's 2 or 3 pages. And it's just me telling myself the story, right? So for instance, for King of Ashes, I knew that I wanted to write about a family, about a son coming home. The old adage, the Thomas Wolfe, you can't go home again. I wanted to talk about that. I knew that I wanted to set it in a crematory. I also knew that I wanted to set it in a town or a city that was suffering the results of urban flight and gentrification too. So I knew that. I knew the names were going to be important because the names in the book mean a lot. We can get into that in a second. And so that is usually, like I said, a 2, maybe 3-page synopsis. Once I had that down, I start writing, and I would refer to the synopsis sort of a guide. There's another thing I do that's really weird.
I love these weird things.
I write pretty extensive biographies for the characters. Okay. 90% of that doesn't make it in the book, but it informs the character's actions, right?
Right.
So, for instance, with King of Ashes, for Roman, I know when he lost his virginity. I know that he is that he's not afraid of violence, even though people think he's soft. I know that he got in a fight when he was a kid that it inspired him to not be afraid of violence. I know that he likes superheroes and comic books. All those things are things that aren't really in the book, but they help me sort of inform the characters' discussions and the way they see things. Same thing with Dante and Nevaeh. And I know those things about them. And so I have this sort of intimacy with them that exists between me and them. And I know how it informs their decision making and also the way they view things. In my last book, All Sinners Bleed, like an example of that, there's a scene in All Sinners Bleed where the sheriff finds a body. This isn't a spoiler, but it's kind of gross. And there's a dead snake in the body's mouth, right?
Ugh.
Yeah, I know. But what people don't know, what nobody knows, but I know because I wrote his biography, Titus is definitely afraid of snakes. But he can't show it because his deputies are there. And so I know that. And so it informs the way he reacts when he sees this. It's the reason he always wear aviator sunglasses because he don't want anybody to see him being afraid. So all of that, those things, those biographies are on a separate doc. Again, 90% of that doesn't make it in the book, but it allows me to sort of create these characters in a way that I feel like they're friends. I know them. and I know what they're thinking, and I know how they're going to think, and I know how they're going to react. So that's another weird little writing thing that I do.
I love that. That's very theater kid of you.
Yeah.
It's very like, oh, I have to know my character would never say that. It's very that energy. Like I have to know everything about my character.
He would never wear Jordans. Like, what are you talking
about?
Yeah,
yeah, totally. Oh my gosh. What about, okay, you tease this. How do you name your characters? Obviously there's a Tracy in the book. So clearly you were inspired by some of the greatest names in the history of naming, like mine, Tracy. But how do you name your characters?
The names always mean something, right?
Okay.
So Roman is named Roman, but also I wanted his character to sort of be emblematic of that. The idea that the Roman Empire had of themselves as the city on seven hills, but they're also brutal and they were vicious. And they, in many ways they spread civilization, but in many ways they destroyed civilization. In so much as Roman sees himself as righteous and intelligent, intelligent and righteous and heroic, but also he's more ruthless than he understands. He's more vicious than people around him anticipate. Nevaeh is heaven backwards. And Nevaeh is not in hell, but she's not in heaven. She's sort of in that limbo, right? She's not been able to be her own self, to be the version of herself. She's not been able to ascend to that heavenly plane, right?
Right.
And then, of course, Dante, Dante's Inferno, Dante Caligari, who wrote, the cantos, he takes us to hell. He's the reason all this happens. But at the same time, he's not the devil. He's just the person that sent us on this journey. So the names always means the same thing with Titus and all this in his bleed, with Beauregard, Bug. Beauregard in all this in my first novel, Black Dog Wasteland, was me intentionally taking what many people consider a stereotypical Southern Confederate name and giving it to an African American man to sort of juxtapose that, to say we are here in the South and the South belongs to us just as much as it belongs to anybody else.
Right. And that book came out around what year? Was that
2020?
2020. I was going to say, I feel like I knew about Jeff Sessions' middle name being Beauregard at that time.
yeah, that was
like I was like, oh, sure. Okay, so I just have like two more questions for you. One is that for people who love King of Ashes, what are some other books that you would say are sort of in conversation with this book that you would recommend to them?
There's a book called Dead Though I May Well Be by Adrian McKitney. It's about the Irish mob in Boston. I think that's a very sort of contemporary, or a book that you said was a colleague of King of Ashes. I also would say, I think The Godfather by Mario Puzo. I think just because I took a lot of inspiration from that, and the family dynamics in that are wild. And so I also think maybe City of Fire by Don Winslow, which is another organized crime book. But on the family dynamic, and this is going to be way out of left field.
Okay.
I think Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it's that very heavy interconnectivity of the family, but also how nobody in that family talks to each other. And so they have all these secrets that they're holding back from each other. So I think those would be books that would be in the same church but different pew than King of Ashes.
Okay. Yeah. I love that. Okay, last one for you. If you could have one person, dead or alive, read this book, who would you want it to be?
My mom.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Sean, thank you so much for being here. This was really a delight. And I any fellow Shakespeare fan is a friend of mine. Folks, you can get King of Ashes out now wherever you get your books. Who narrates the audiobook for this one?
Adam Lazar White. He's done all my books, and he's
done all of them.
An amazing narrator. He is just, his understanding and interpretation of my work is just, it's so gratifying. He's incredible.
I have to tell you, the Stacks Pack community, which is like my Patreon community, they talk about your audiobooks all the time. They talk about how good they are. I really struggle to do fiction on audio, so I have to sit down and read with my eyes because sometimes the audio can wash over me. But I got to go back and listen to some of your books on audio just because I want to hear this performance, because I am told it is like outstanding, through the roof, amazing.
He's incredible. I just listened to the audio King of Ashes. So the first line of King of Ashes is, he dreams of his mother. The way he delivers that line, it makes it feel epic. It makes it feel like we're beginning a myth. And that's more than I can do. He does that. So it's incredible. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. Everybody go get your copy of the book, and we will see you in the stacks. Thank you all so much for listening, and thank you again to S.A. Cosby for joining the show. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to Claire McLaughlin and Danielle Thomas for making this episode possible. Remember, our book club pick this month is The Art Thief by Michael Finkel, which we will be discussing on Wednesday, June 25th with Kira O'Sullivan. If you love the show and you want inside access to it, head to patreon.com/The Stacks and join the Stacks Pack, and check out my newsletter at tracythomas.substack.com. Please make sure you're subscribed to The Stacks wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're listening through Apple Podcasts or Spotify, will you leave us a rating and a review? For more from The Stacks, follow us on social media at The Stacks Pod on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok, and check out our website at thestackspodcast.com. Today's episode of The Stacks was edited by Christian Duenas with production assistance from Waikia Freelo. Our graphic designer is Robin McCrite, and our theme music is from Tigirigis. The Stacks is created and produced by me, Tracy Thomas.